Starport Omega, probing the galaxy one exhaust port at a time.
The whole analog studio that I'm putting together over here, and the ability to make good recordings. So, back over to who is next.
You closed your stream.
Well, I did close my screen because this is because there we go.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And next.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so rules of the game. I am in control of the mute button. If this gets too out of hand. This is going to be a debate. Tom, what debate are we having tonight?
So we've been talking about time travel a lot since Discovery, the Discovery travels forward in time. We all know that you can travel forward in time by simply going to sleep, right? But time travel stories always involve going back in time and often changing the past. So my question to you guys, who do you think gets time travel the most right? Not so much in terms of what machine makes time travel work, but in terms of what would happen if you tried to change the past? Can you change the past? And what would happen if you actually did it? So each of us is going to go for, well, let's call it 2 minutes, since that seems to be the debate format du jour, and just tell us what your idea is, and then the rest of us will try to challenge you a little bit, and everybody gets a turn. So
hold on,
let's roll a dice. Let's roll a die. Who goes first?
Yep,
Alexa,
and I'll start
pick
the
a number
clock.
between 1 and 5.
Wait, why am I in this?
2. 1, 2. Jim, you get to go first.
Okay.
Oh, great. Which one do I think does it the rightest? Well, does it have to be a movie?
No. It could be a television show or a book or whatever.
How about a book? How about Thrice Upon a Time by James P. Hogan? You and I talked about this the other night.
Yes.
And that is the one where if you actually change the future, then the past that you were communicating with disappears. And is replaced with another past. Unfortunately, the people in the old past don't know anything about your interactions with the future past. So basically, communication becomes the best thing to do is not to answer if somebody knocks, because you don't want to disappear. Time's up.
What you're saying is you're not actually traveling to the past, but you're communicating to the past.
The book did not have actual travel. The book had communication. And the communication was, this guy got a weird message on his computer, and it said, "Be careful of the jar." And he looked, and he was just about to knock a jar off his desk. And so he stopped, and he tried to get in touch with where the message came from, and it didn't matter what he did, he couldn't get in touch with him. Because once he didn't knock the jar off, that possible future disappeared. The one where they knew he was going to knock the jar off, obviously that no longer occurred. So they were going to replace with somebody else who had no idea what he was talking about.
So what Jim's describing is what's called a paradox, and it's very similar to the grandfather paradox, where Bunny, what's the grandfather paradox?
I feel like I'm back in school.
She's like, I don't want to know. I have a counter.
I'm a fucking moderator. That is it.
So the grandfather paradox basically says that you can't change if you go back in time to kill your own grandfather, then
can't.
How were you born in order to go kill your own grandfather? So in the case of this story, if you send the message to the past to say watch out for the jar, and the guy doesn't knock the jar off, who sent the message?
And that's why they were gone.
Should I put 2 minutes on the clock for someone to rebuttal this theory? Does anyone wish to rebuttal this time travel paradox by communication?
Time travel madness?
Maybe
No.
what we need to do is we need to have 2 rounds. Madness. We need to have a round of.
I say personally.
It should be basically what it would be is Jim talking for 2 minutes and no one else butting in. So
I think personally that my theory can't be correct because it didn't involve a shiny silver car.
Okay, then.
Okay, Tom, roll the dice.
Alexa, pick a number between 1 and 4. 2. Let's see. 1. Let's see. 1, 2. Jim already got picked, so Judd, you're next.
I was about to be up again.
All right, how about this? Every single instance of time travel, no matter the media, is correct. But they're all incorrect. Because we have no idea if you can actually time travel or not.
Oh, you got to pick one, Judd.
Oh, come on.
You got a minute and a half left. Come on. Pick a hill and die on it.
I don't think about the time travel stories too much. It's, whatever happens. It's in the story. I like it or not. I don't have any debating about time travel. I feel is kind of a useless subject. I mean, okay, whatever. I mean, was the Avengers, the second Avenger movie? They just kind of glossed over it, like, oh yeah, well, it's nothing like that movie. Yet everything they talk about is pretty much like that movie.
You know what?
Nope. 50 seconds.
I'm done.
Okay, you want to end it with 47 seconds?
I'm done.
Okay, Tom, your rebuttal.
I was going to say that I like the. I think that the time travel in Avengers is maybe the closest to my personal theory of time travel. You notice that none of. Well, think about this for a second. Did any of the actions they performed in the past affect the present in any way? Because they all went back. They picked up some MacGuffin from whoever they needed to go to. They brought the MacGuffin back. And at the end of it, what did they do? They returned the stones back to where they found them. Which means that the present was unaffected.
With one
So, is that where you want to end that
Brad?
thought? Go ahead. I'm going to stop the timer thing.
The response I would have to that is huge spoiler for those of you that haven't seen Endgame. The problem is you say that nothing really happened with one major exclusion, Cap.
Yeah, leaving that out. Well, and that's a good point because, but the question being, Captain America. When did Captain America go back to? Because I think that he went back to the time after the television series with Peggy, and he got his time with her after.
Well, if you go look at the pictures she has of her husband, who does he look like? If you look at the frame on her bedside table, and I think it was in the second Avengers movie, there's a picture of her and her husband very old before he died. Well, small problem, he didn't die. This is a theory that's been going on, and I looked at a couple of them and I laughed my head off pretty thoroughly because it looks like she married Cap.
Right. So, and that was in a prior movie where we saw the picture, or are you talking about in Endgame?
No, it was in one of the prior movies, and I'm not sure whether that was intentional or not.
Because in the first, what was it? The first of when was it? Captain America. When did he go see her in the hospital? I don't remember very well. I remember because he came to the future and he came to the present by being frozen in ice by sleeping for 50 years, and he goes and meets up with her, and
it wasn't one of the Avengers movies. I'm sorry, it was one of the Captain America movies. I think Winter Soldier. This is before she died because she was dead in the third
right
Captain America movie.
I'm gonna go rewatch that and see if I can see what you're talking
It was
about.
in the Winter Soldier.
That'll be interesting to see if they set that up. Because they really did tightly couple all of the Marvel movies so that everything kept carried into everything else.
Yeah, and a lot of the little details in every single movie links to one of the other movies. in some way.
That'd be interesting to see. And not only that, not only did she marry him, time traveler Rogers, but she didn't tell him.
She didn't know.
She didn't tell the younger version that
Well,
that he came back eventually.
yeah,
Sorry
because
about
at that
that.
point she didn't remember him.
Right.
She was suffering from, if I remember correctly, it was
Oh, she
incredibly
had some
advanced
dementia.
Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
That's
she was,
depressing.
yeah. But it's interesting. But let's move on with the format.
Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
All right. The series that I thought actually did time travel best was actually one of the ones that kind of did it the worst. But they got one critical detail correct, and they called this out. And it's one of the things that's always bothered me about time travel. When you travel in time, you're also traveling in space. And in Stargate SG-1, when they got into the time ship and went back, they went, "Where's the planet?" Well, it's like, "Well, over there." It's like, and one of the soldier guys pops up. "Why is it over there?" It's like, because the planet isn't in the same place at this time as previously. And that's one of the things that as soon as I heard that, I went, "Oh, that's the gaping hole in Back to the Future." That just suddenly just like bothers me. It's like every time they travel, he shows up where he in the exact same location on the planet, but the planet isn't in the same location. The solar system isn't in the same location. We're moving at what, 60,000 miles an hour? Just on a planetary level?
Something like that, yeah. Yeah, the
I
Earth
mean-
itself is moving. The sun is moving. The galaxy is moving.
Yeah, the entire
universe
universe
itself
is in
motion.
expanding.
Yeah. Sorry,
So
you
that's
guys
one
were
of the things.
good.
That's one of the things that always bothered me about time travel is with the exception of Doctor Who, they never took into account space as another factor. It just, oh, we'll be right back here, and it's like, no, that's not how it works. The universe is in motion, and when they went back in time, they had to fly back to the planet. It really kind of clicked that that's one of the things that most people and writers don't take into account. Whether they're just using time travel as a mechanism to push their story forward, or the time travel itself is a critical aspect of the story, they always go into detail about the time travel aspect, but not the space. So building a spaceship that was capable of time travel made sense because no matter where you go, you're not going to be in what's around you may not be there.
So
Unless
every
you're
time
doing a really
ship
tight. Sorry?
So every time ship should also be a spaceship.
Correct. And that's one of the things I liked about Doctor Who is that time and relative dimension in space. It literally, from the beginning, it was designed to be able to handle that issue. And it's really kind of funny that one of the oldest science fiction shows, actually the oldest science fiction show that's been ongoing, managed to get that right, and yet everyone else gets it wrong. And
There's
I'll
a cat
go ahead.
yowling.
Sorry.
I'm pretty sure I hit my limit there, so I'll just end it there.
Well, I turned that off because it's less of a debate and it's more of a discussion because
Yeah.
we're bad at debates. No offense to this
Yeah.
group. We're bad at the debates.
Oh, yeah.
Because we all add in to everyone else's stuff in agreement and disagreement. We're great at that.
So this comes back to since this is kind of a discovery themed night. This is the thing that drove me crazy about the end of season 2 of Discovery and the beginning of season 3. Does anybody remember? You okay, Jim?
Yeah.
Does anybody remember what happened when they came back from when they used the magic mushroom drive to come back from the mirror universe? At the end of the
Did you
season?
seriously just call it the
I
magic
finally-
mushroom drive?
I finally have somebody else using that phrase. I'm telling you, I hate that.
So,
I hate that damn engine. I hate it.
so the ship comes back from the mirror universe, and what happened? They lost 3 months. They came back. It was 3 months later, if I recall, and the war had basically been lost. And basically, what was it? Stamets basically said, "Well, if you're traveling in time, you're also you're traveling in space. You're also traveling in time." And just like Brad said, any vessel that's capable of traveling in that instantaneously traveling across interstellar distances is also capable instantaneously traveling through time, because time and space are really all one thing. And I thought that the whole idea of the Discovery needing Michael Burnham's angel suit in order to travel to the future was ridiculous, because they should have just been able to power up the spore drive and set their destination dial to 930 years in the
Part of
future, and
the
push a
sun.
button and go. But setting that aside, there's a book written by Michael Crichton back in the 90s, I think it was, called Timeline, and you see one of the pictures on the screen is the Timeline movie. I don't think the movie does the book justice, but my favorite aspect of the book was that, and this is cheating, by the way, and I admit this is cheating, they did not actually travel in time in a book named Timeline. They traveled to alternate universes, and each universe basically had a different start time.
Rick and
So
Morty. Sorry.
yeah, okay, yeah, Rick and Morty. So in our universe, time started at 0, because somebody's got to be 0, right? And then they they want to go 500 years in the past and check out medieval England. So they actually, I don't even think it's 500 years. When was the medieval era, the Dark Ages? Well, that was probably about 1,000. Let's just call it 1,000 years ago. So they want to go 1,000 years into the past. Well, they can't physically go 1,000 years into the past. Instead, what they do is they find a universe that started 1,000 years later. So they jump from our universe to that universe, and because that universe started 1,000 years later, they're really 1,000 years. They're effectively 1,000 years in their own past. Except that, and they said this in the book, you can't change. Even if we change something, if we go to the Federal Express office, Western Union office, and write a letter to ourselves and date it 2020, and warn everybody about the coronavirus, it won't get here, because it's going to go to the people in the future of
Cough,
Universe
cough. We should use a different name. Cough, cough.
Right. Sorry about that. I won't use
Thank
that word
you.
again.
Huh?
So that that really solidified my idea of traveling through time, in the sense that if you do something that affects the past, you can't do it. I mean, you literally can't change what's already happened. And Michael Crichton got around it by creating a whole separate universe for each time they travel through time. Other stories that I've read, and I can't remember the story, and I really need to find it. But the story is, these guys put together this package of technology and sent it 1,000 years into the past. And this thing showed up at a time when people in history were suddenly discovering new things, and they created all these new technologies and all these new mathematical ideas, all showed up just kind of out of nowhere. And the guy's like, yeah, we sent it to this time. And then the other dude, they're like waiting. They're like, how long is it going to take to get there? And they said, well, the transit takes, I don't know, 16 hours. I'm just pulling the number out of my ear because I can't remember what it was. So they're waiting, and then 16 hours later, they're like, nothing's changed. The world hasn't changed. What's going on? And then one of them goes, oh, crud, I just realized what happened. The time that we sent this information package to is a time where all this technology showed up out of nowhere. We changed history, but we did it 1,000 years ago. The history that we changed was already changed before we ever were born. So the loop, the cycle is unbroken, and that to me is what I liked about movies like Timeline. That's what I like about a lot of Doctor Who, but unfortunately not all of Doctor Who, because Doctor Who is great science fiction and great time travel stories right up until they break the TARDIS in order to fix something. And all that is to point to this article that NPR posted. That's basically, I believe it was some college thesis, that he explained mathematically how time travel is theoretically feasible, as long as you don't create a paradox.
And is this what one of the things that you're posting to the Reddit?
Right, and that's the link to this article is going to be on the Reddit page, on the Reddit community. Sorry, and The idea being that he said almost exactly what I was thinking, which is that even if you went to the past and tried to change the events that happened, all that's going to happen is your change, since it already happened before you began your time travel. The changes you make, you're simply participating in those events rather than altering them, which it really sucks because it's hard to watch time travel stories without. It's hard to watch time travel stories now without wanting to yell at the screen because what happens in Back to the Future when Marty McFly is fading out? You know what happens in all these different stories when Keanu Reeves is trying to change his girlfriend's death. You know, it's just like I don't have a good answer for that, so I'm going to shut up now. And anybody else got anything to add?
So confusing.
It's all time you want.
Do you remember the remake of The Time Machine? One
Yes.
that came out about 10 years ago. Remember the line in that film where it's like, how many times did you go back in time and try to save your girlfriend? You know, all the way down to, it's like you moved her out of the way. You decided not to be there and a car ran over. You stayed at home and the house caught on fire. You went for a drive and the car exploded. You were outside on a deck and you wouldn't let her go outside and a meteorite came down on her head. Don't you change the past?
What's going on over
Actually,
here?
funny enough, the Dresden books had a really good line about that. Dresden was asking about time travel, and Santa Claus, of all people, was the responder, going, you can go back and change small things that don't affect much. But the bigger something is, the harder it is to change. To which he responded, there's a conservation of history principle. He goes, a little more complicated than that, but close enough. For example, if you try to go back in time and kill Hitler, Hitler is a pivotal. Why can't I say pivotal?
Pivotal.
Pivotal.
Got too many
Why am I
you got
inserting
too
a
many-
B?
You have too many syllables in there.
Syllables.
I put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Too many syllables.
Hitler is a pivotal character in 20th century history. And he's often used as an example of why time travel, if it's invented, can't be used the way people think it should be. Because if we were to go back in time and kill Hitler before his rise to power, what would that lead to? We don't know. What if it leads to someone even worse?
Or what if it leads to and as horrific as World War II and everything else was, what if World War II doesn't happen? What about all the technologies that arose out of World War II that are making our life possible today? Does our world become uninhabitable because we haven't developed the farming and the food tech, everything else that came out of World War II and the space age?
Well,
yeah, it's just there's too big of a chain of events linked back to that one individual and what he did. I see even Fat Cat's complaining about this.
So, anyways, I didn't feed the cats before the stream, so they're expecting dinner. And my cat, I don't know if anyone else saw me jump up. She decided to try to get tape off of this box here, and she managed to get some, so that's why I jumped up, because she was choking on it. She got it up, it's fine, but I had to put her up, because it turns out she can get tape off that box.
Well, the next segment is Brad and
Shit.
Chuds, if you want to go feed your cats while they're talking about Zen 3.
Maybe, but sorry. He's being crazy cat right now. I can't really show that without that video camera very well, but I might be able to. The thing with him is, if he gets a hold of me, he will leave gashes on me. So that one I'm going to be cautious about. He's half Bengal. So the next segment, I'll leave it on that. I shall be right back. I'm going to feed this fat cat. Because if I don't, I'm going to lose a limb.
Or have a few extra puncture marks.
We're at about 2 hours on the stream. There's really not much to say about Zen 3.
Well, no, what we were talking about was going into a kind of a dive into the architecture.
Well, I don't know. I mean, without final hardware being sent to reviewers, it's hard to, at least performance-wise. That I'm starting to actually get kind of tired.
Is that Duke Nukem behind you?
Duke Nukem?
It looked like Duke Nukem was on your screen back there.
Quite
No?
possibly.
I thought it was
That
Cal.
would be Doom Guy.
Oh.
Yeah, his cousin.
But as far as the Zen 3 architecture goes, I mean, everything that I've seen so far, it is overall better implementation or incremental, which is what they seem to be doing with every generation over the previous. They're doing TikTok like what Intel used to do.
Before it
Before
turned
Intel-
into tick-tock, talk, 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 talk.
Yeah. Because Intel can't seem to get off of 14 nanometer. And in fact, the next CPUs should be out the end of next year. Looks like they're backporting their 10 nanometer processors to 14 nanometer, so they can actually make them in mass. Which is, I'm wondering how they're going to get around the power and heat, the power requirements and the heat generation of that.
From what was said in the release or the media release from Intel, was that they're pushing certain lines of processors that are in heavy demand, specifically desktop processors, to fulfill their needs for clients like Dell, HP, Lenovo, and such. And they're pushing it back to the 14 nanometer, but it's a bit of a ambiguation because the 14 nanometer is actually Samsung's process. And the part that's interesting about this is they're calling it 14 nanometer, but Samsung calls it 12 nanometer. And I really don't want to get into the huge debate in the how do you measure the size of transistors, because every one of the fab companies and the manufacturers of the technology measures it slightly differently. I mean, realistically, some of the circuits are measured, you could realistically measure in atoms width. The A20 gateway has been at like 5 atoms wide for what, 15 years now? You can't go any smaller because then you start running into the random electron jumping issue that IBM ran into with one of their prototype processes that they developed in the mid 2000s. And it just, that gave birth to a whole new type of insulation, the silicon on insulation system that was developed, which was the first time we actually, instead of doing doping and then insulations, we actually put the actual process on the insulator instead of putting the insulator between them. It's, if you're really out there in material sciences or you really enjoy complex physics, it's a fascinating field, but Intel's kind of stuck because they cannot get their process working. In fact, Intel just took a huge dive today when the news came out that they were still having issues and they were still continuing with the pushback. So I think they took a 6% haircut on their stock value.
10%.
10%? Oh, dear
Damn.
Lord, 10%. I think I might have been looking at a preliminary result in my stock portfolio, because 10% is a huge chunk to lose.
Indeed.
I think it was, oh, no, I'm sorry. I was thinking of the dollar amount. It was about $6, which would have been about 10%. That's a huge problem for Intel. Like, personally, I grew up with AMD. I'm not an AMD fanboy. I use what works, but I've always had a kind of soft spot for AMD because they're the underdog.
Yep.
And yet, I'm looking at Intel, aka Chipzilla, and the kind of shenanigans they've pulled, and they're getting their asses handed to them again. The last time Intel was in this bad a position, they gave birth to the modern architecture that they've been using for the last 15 years, the core architecture. And the funny part,
which was based on the
Pentium 3.
Memron.
No. It was based on the Pentium M, which was actually a modernized version of the Pentium 3. They threw the entire Pentium 4 architecture. The net burst architecture got tossed. After all that money, the billions of dollars Intel spent in research and development and process manufacturing technologies, they tossed it, went, it doesn't work. We can't make it any better. We're getting our asses kicked by AMD. Let's go back to what we knew worked, which was the Pentium 3. And it's, little cousin, the Pentium M.
Well, and who was it that created the modern desktop 64-bit architecture? It wasn't Intel.
AMD. It was AMD.
That's right. Everybody calls it x64, but the truth is, the correct name is AMD 64 because AMD were the ones who actually came up with the ability to streamline 64-bit instructions and 32-bit instructions into the same ISA.
Intel had the IA 64-bit instruction set, and they were actually trying to do that, but AMD already had the x86 64-bit.
Yeah.
And by the time Intel was like, all right, well, this is going to be our desktop processor, AMD already had it for 2 years, and Microsoft said, no, you're going to go AMD's route because we're not going to support IA64. There's no backwards compatibility whatsoever. It's all...
There actually was an Itanium Windows. There actually was an Itanium version of Windows, but I don't think it ever made it to XP. I think it was just for...
No, it
Windows
was
2000.
Server 2000 and Server 2003, and even Server 2008. I don't know if they had a 2008 R2 version that was IA64 because at that point Microsoft was so done maintaining a separate development tree. Because the big problem with IA64, it was a great instruction set. It actually was really good, but here's the problem: no 32-bit support at all. Period. They completely threw it out.
And that was the problem is with the Itanium processors, you lost your ability to run 32-bit x86 tasks. You had to do everything Itanium. There might have been an emulation layer in there, but
they tried the emulation route, kind of like how modern Windows 64-bit supports Windows 30-bit through the WoW or Windows on Windows system.
Well, the difference is
it
with
didn't
32-bit
work.
But the difference is with 32-bit software, we're actually running it on the hardware, because our processor is constantly switching back and forth between 32 and 64 bits. Unlike with Itanium, you had to emulate the 32-bit instructions on a different ISA.
Yeah,
so it's no different than when when they're using those ARM processors now to run Windows. It's like they still have to emulate an x86 to run x86 programs.
Yes and no. The way Microsoft isn't given much information about how they're doing that out, but from what I've been able to glean from the technical documentation and from what I've seen of the actual hardware, they're doing part emulation and part translation. So for certain parts of the code, they're emulating because there is no equivalent in the RISC architecture that ARM uses. However, there are a lot of integer operations, a lot of the math operations that are critical to modern computing are present. So they're translating it from the Intel code to the ARM equivalent, and they're doing some magic in between that they don't want to talk about or give any information on.
There's some hardware support for it, from what I understand. But yeah,
it's pretty impressive. But the problem with the Itanium wasn't actually 32-bit. It was the cost, and the cost of an Itanium, the lowest in Itanium at the time that it was being used, was something like $4,000 a socket.
Oh, jeez.
It was expensive. And this is how it really kind of got screwed. It wasn't AMD that killed it. It was actually the companies not wanting to support it, and Intel had yield issues again. They were so expensive because they were not having, if they did an entire wafer, they were getting, I wish I remember the article that said the actual yield numbers, but if I remember correctly, it was less than 50% yield per wafer.
Ouch.
Yeah.
And you can't really bin those because nobody wants a Itanium, Celeron edition, because those are going in servers and high-end workstations.
This was Intel's mainframe competitors, what it was meant to compete against.
Hmm.
It was meant to compete against the 64-bit RISC architectures. So like Alpha 64, MIPS 64, stuff like that was not really expensive to implement and didn't have a lot of performance, but it could scale out incredibly. Like, I remember Alpha 64 servers that had 816 processors per unit. An Itanium could do 2 per U.
So, not to interrupt, but I'm going to give you guys a small time reminder. We've been going for over 2 hours now.
Oh,
So,
dear.
if you guys want to wrap up this topic, that might be a good idea.
The thing that I wanted to say that was so interesting about Zen and what they did is Tom and Jim can remember back in the early computing days where everything had to be separate because it was too expensive to put together into a single chip. But as the technology advanced, the performance cost of separated chips eventually overcame the cost of having a single monolithic chip.
True.
Because the performance differences were so large that people would pay for that difference. Well, now we've reached the point where monolithic chip design has now become so complicated and just massively impossible to generate to where we're running into an interesting cost where we're going the opposite direction. Zen 3 is chiplets. The actual memory controller
Zen
primary
2.
interface isn't in there. I'm sorry.
So they're
Zen
putting
2.
multiple
Jed.
multiple dies on a like a mega die or something.
Jed, repeat what you just said.
Zen 2 is the same way. In fact, what Zen 3 is, they're using the same board controller that Zen 2 is using. They're just updating the chiplet cores.
So basically what Zen did is instead of having your core execute, what we refer to as your core, your processor, and your memory controller, and your interlinking, and everything all on one chip, they took the complex part, the part that is truly important, the cores, and pulled it out. Now this is more like what you see in mainframe and supercomputers, where you have a CPU separated from the memory controller. What has actually happened is the memory controller and all the linking, basically all the logic to run the motherboard, is a separate chip, and all of the CPU cores are separate dies that talk to the main chip. Akin to how the early processing or the early computers had everything broken out into different chips. This is how Intel or how AMD got around the yield issues. They didn't have to print a whole new wafer for this generation. They continue to use the wafers and technologies that are working for the memory and interlink and control, and a completely different wafer for all the chips. So if one chip on that die doesn't meet specification, that's okay. They don't toss out an entire processor. They just toss out that one little piece. And if you go into their server line, you have 1 chiplet, 2 chiplet, 3 chiplet, 4 chiplet. That's how they're getting 64 cores in one socket. They're using 4 16-core chiplets. And that's one of the things that made the Infinity Fabric so amazing, is they're doing all of this on a single processor. They basically take an old school mainframe technology and moved it into a single socket for the consumer market, and the performance benefits are through the roof. But as anyone that's looked at Zen 1, 2, Zen Plus, and all the variations, there's been a lot of teething issues. That's why I'm really looking forward to the new Gen 3 of Zen, because it looks like they finally cracked a lot of those teething problems, just looking at the basic performance difference on the tests that have leaked. It's 30 or 40% faster than the previous generation. The previous generation was within margin of error on Intel on a lot of tests. So if this is faster than the previous generation, once this hit the real world, how much better is it actually going to be? And that's me nerding out over architectures.
No,
I'm sorry. I find this stuff
it's
truly
fantastic stuff.
fascinating.
the architecture on that chip is way cool bitchin'. It really is.
And And I love the idea of chiplets, and I'm it like I said, it brought to mind how binning works, where the idea was if you have a chip that works at 5 gigahertz but not at 6, you sell it as a 5 gigahertz chip, and then the ones that work at 6, you sell as 6 gigahertz chips. Obviously, that's crazy. We don't make 6 gigahertz chips yet, but that's been going on for years. And do you remember back in the DM? Do you remember back in the 90s when people were taking Intel's processors and they were like shaving off the labels
I do.
and relabeling them?
Yep.
I had the opposite of that happen. I bought an AMD 1 gigahertz that turned out to not be actually a 1 gigahertz. It was a 750. I guess I had exactly that happen. It was actually a 750, and if I ran it at if I ran the front side bus at 133, machine wouldn't boot. I had to hit reset and reset and reset, and after about the 5th time, it would boot. And now imagine if half the chips you make aren't up to spec. On a huge die like the titanium, yeah, your yield is going to go to crap.
That's certainly a profit margin going. Yeah.
And with chiplets, you can bin all the chips appropriately and stick together a bunch of mid-level chips that perform well but not great, on one big chip that performs well but not great.
Well,
Yeah.
the nice thing about the Zen architecture, or at least Zen 2, starting with Zen 2 and into Zen 3, is that they can make the memory IO die controller on, say, 12 nanometer, 14 nanometer. It doesn't require to be as like a 7 nanometer process because there's they can afford to have it a little bit bigger. Doesn't require as much power, that kind of thing. And then the chiplets themselves, they can do 7 nanometer. And for yield, if on a chiplet, an 8-core chiplet, 1 or 2 cores is bad, okay, we sell that as a 6-core chiplet or a 4-core chiplet, and we put that in there. So they have the Ryzen 3, they got the Ryzen 5, they got the Ryzen 7.
They've got ways of taking advantage of mistakes in processors to give you a better chip.
They have ways of making your chips.
Okay, I think if we keep going down this rabbit hole, we're going to go for another hour or two, and then Buddy's
Hey,
going to be really
hey,
angry.
hey! Don't bring rabbit holes into this.
Yeah, I mean,
We already did wormholes, no rabbit holes.
to
Fine, rat hole.
dream the time travel dream.
And that is
to
if you are in the
go
mood to
without
talk about
having
it.
to go.
Tom,
Yes.
can you see my hand?
No.
Can you see my hand?
Yes.
You're the one flipping the pictures, right?
Yeah.
I raise my hand, flip the pictures. We're going to see if I can get through this and make Bunny happy.
Okay.
Ready?
Yes.
What I've been looking at lately and been watching for the last 2 weeks is Star Trek fan films. I like them a lot. They are... Some of the production values aren't so great. Others are absolutely outstanding. The ones we're going to be talking about tonight, the production values are absolutely unbelievable. It's like you're watching a show right from 1965. This is the cast of Star Trek Continues. Now, this is the actual Enterprise bridge that they have up here. Vic Magnolia bought an 18,000 square foot church, stripped it out to its just bare walls, and bought a copy of the blueprints for constructing the sets that Paramount and Desilu did back in 1965. He built an exact duplicate of every set that they ever had on the show. Hence, it looks really, really good. They made 11 episodes, and they were going to make more, but that was when CBS came out with their "you can't make any more fan films that make sense. You can only make the 15-minute nonsense versions." And the very first one they did had one of my favorite characters in it. I am Apollo. You can tell I'm a god by how damn big I am.
And the fact that he's wearing very little.
And he's wearing very little. This is Michael
And
Forrest.
he looks good doing it.
This is Michael Forrest, and he's been in a lot of other films and a lot of westerns, believe it or not, and a Twilight Zone episode. And here he played Apollo. 50 years later, he played Apollo again on the very first episode of Star Trek Continues.
Oh, that
It
is
was
awesome.
a wonderful episode. It was a little rough because it was their first episode, and first episodes usually are. But it allows you to get a chance to get used to the characters because they redo Spock and Kirk and all them. And it allows you a chance to get used to the characters again without, really having a problem with it. Because while they're the same characters and they act a lot the same way, they don't look like them and they don't sound like them. But by the end of this episode, you really, really don't care. This is the second episode, Volani. We have our Green Array and Strange Girl, but in this one, the episode revolves around issues of sexual slavery, prostitution, and a lot of deep, heavy issues, which kind of brings this episode down, but it has a really good message to it, which is something else that I really like about Star Trek, is that sometimes it will talk about things and will actually mean something. You can pull something from the episode. The acting in this is wonderful, and they had a surprise guest host, or guest star, and it's the next one, Lou Ferrigno, also known as the Incredible Hulk.
He's
Didn't have
green
to even
too.
change his makeup.
Yeah, I don't recognize him with the bald head.
Vic
Yeah,
Magnolia
right?
is a voice actor who does Full Metal Alchemist. And so he knows a lot of, I don't want to say minor stars, but let's say they don't have TV shows like they used to. You know what I mean? And apparently Lou Ferrigno is a big Star Trek fan and begged to get in on this, and they wrote him a part. So he plays the big heavy in this episode. It's actually really, really good. But then
He
after
was in a couple of episodes of Chuck.
he was in a lot of different little things.
There we go.
This is the third episode, Fairest of Them All. It is my absolute favorite that I've seen so far. I've watched through all of them, but I've only really watched the first three. This one takes place right after the episode Mirror, Mirror. And instead of starting off on the original Enterprise that we know, it starts off on the Mirror Enterprise and Spock making up his mind whether to be the revolutionary to overthrow the Empire. And that's what this entire episode is about. It is absolutely wonderful, and one thing that you have to keep in mind, that it doesn't matter who does it, Spock looks awesome with a beard.
Yes.
I don't know what they're thinking. He should always have a beard.
I personally, I think that bearded men are more virile and just
As he
respectable looking,
pets
you know.
his. Wait,
Yeah,
wait,
no,
that's
I'm
not
over here
fair.
rubbing
I
my
need to
beard
get one I
too.
can glue on, you guys, because I can't grow my own.
Well,
You need to get one of those evil goatee kits.
Well, we are coming up on Halloween, so maybe you should give it a shot.
Yeah, here's his credit. Zaman in Star Trek Continues is 2014.
This is a picture with three of the people in that episode together. The guy in the red shirt back there in back plays Scotty. That is actually James Doohan's son, Chris. Who
Oh,
gets
wow.
revised his dad's role, and he did a little thing talking about that, and he was just jazzed about doing it.
Oh yeah, I would have been too.
He said it was great. And by the time you get to the third episode, the kind of it not really being like the original series starts going away. And for example, I'll give you this. Here's a scene out of Mirror Mirror with the original cast. Standing in the transporter room wanting to know what the hell is going on. Here's the same scene with the new actors. It looks close enough to keep me interested. And quite honestly, if it doesn't look close enough to keep you interested, I don't really know what to tell you. Because
Good God, I'm looking at the backgrounds, just going.
Like I said,
They're
it's an
identical.
exact duplicate of the sets they used at Paramount. They're exact.
Which one is which? I can't tell which one is William Shatner.
I do love how the fact that this actress did not starve herself in the fan film, because like to actually have abs on a female, you have to have a very low body fat percentage, which is actually unhealthy. We're actually made to have fat on our lower stomachs. It's to protect our reproductive organs, but so many people forget that. Anyways, continue. That's
It's
where my
just-
brain goes.
It's amazing to me the amount of work that went into this and how much money this guy must have actually spent on putting these sets together. You can actually go and rent them now. He rents out the sets for people to put together, the little 10 and 15-minute episodes they do now. So when you see any new fan films and they look really good, it's because they're using the sets that he built.
I'd
So
kind of
I
love to
say-
rent it out.
Go and see it because Apollo commands it. Did I time it or did I time it?
That was really good.
I I'd actually kind of like to rent the sets out, not for filming an episode, but for like doing like a little documentary about how Star Trek has affected every one of our lives as, geeks and nerds, and doing it on a set of Star Trek, the original series. Even though I wasn't alive when it was around, its effects still, propagated.
I can
Yeah.
barely remember it on there was a rerun when I was a kid. They had the Assignment Earth was on as a rerun. I can remember watching that when I was a kid with my parents. I would have been about 5. And I can just barely remember it.
My first episode of Star Trek that I actually remember watching was the one with the shape changer in the insane asylum. And
Destroy.
I caught it at 11 o'clock at night on a weeknight during the summer. I forced myself. I'm like, Star Trek, this looks interesting. So I made myself stay up till 11 o'clock. I actually sat through the news. That should tell you how committed I was at 9 years old, to sit through the news to watch that episode. And for the rest of the summer, I probably watched the entire TV series during that summer because there's only 70 some episodes. And so I never got to see any of the original run of Star Trek. They were done by the time I was born.
Yeah, a couple of the actors that were in the very first episode of this. Jamie Balmer, the guy who played Apollo in the new remake of Battlestar Galactica, was in it. I don't know. He must have lost a bet or something because he really didn't seem to be into it too much. And that one was pretty neat.
Okay. So since we're wrapping up here, if you guys won't mind sticking around for about 5 minutes after stream and helping me go through a raid, thank you guys for joining us so much. And again, you can always join our Reddit page, and that is at Starport Omega /Reddit. Or you can just follow this simple link right here that I put in chat. You can also follow me on Twitter. You can follow Judd on his YouTube channel to rewatch this episode, including some of the parts that you may not have seen because you were not here yet or that you stepped away. And he'll have the full thing uploaded pretty quick after the stream ends.
Well, we're streaming live, so as soon as the stream ends,
yes,
it's it.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. But yeah. Anyways, if you guys want to wait a little while, I will have an updated version of it to my YouTube page in about a week's time, next Friday. And the podcast is every other Friday, same time, about 10 p.m. We're always fashionably late. So when we're early, it's going to be one of those moments of, wait, what happened? What went wrong?
When we're early, you don't know what happened.
So I'm going to go ahead and be rating Axum 666 tonight, and he is streaming Dead by Daylight, which is very Halloween of him to do. It is one of his usual streams. He is an American who is working in Japan right now, and he is actually one of my favorite streamers, and he happens to be streaming at this time. So we'll go ahead
I'm going to end my YouTube stream right now.
Okay. Bye, Judd's people. Bye. So thank you guys for joining me. And remember, in his chat when we raid, lots of love. We kill friends and enemies the same way with love and kindness. And I will see you guys in the next live stream.
Starport Omega, your last stop for fuel and gas, 2.5 million light years.